is the Ross Tucker Football Podcast.
Yeah, it is, but it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a Monster Monday presented by DraftKings, America's #1 sportsbook app. You know it. Get the code Ross. Get that deposit bonus. More on that a little bit later. It's a new week. Gosh, we're just about here into September. New week, by the way, means we will have new winners. A new Spread the Word winner via social media at Ross Tucker NFL, at RossTuckerPod. You guys know the deal there. And a new sponsor confirmation email winner. And look, if you take advantage of any of our sponsors, you are entered to win one of the free Madden copies we have. It's actually Madden codes. But if you get the DraftBook Sportsbook app on your phone, take a screenshot using the code Ross before you deposit, you get a real good chance. I mean, those are the people that we're looking for over the next couple weeks. So whether your state's street legal or not yet, and you know there's some new states out there, Colorado, Illinois, West Virginia, go ahead and download that bad boy and put the code Ross in. Busy week, first week of the year that we are 5 days. We are daily. First time since the Super Bowl. You'll be able to catch us every single day. And I'm very fired up about just the season's about to be here and today's guest, because the first time I ever called an NFL football game was with this guy, was with today's guest, who's all over the place, still calling NFL football games, and now has an awesome podcast to boot. He is the great Chris Myers from Fox. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
Chris, great to have you, man. Great to see you. And it is funny. I don't know if you know this, but, when we did that game back in, it was probably like 2009, maybe. I retired in 2008, 2009, maybe 2010. It was at Seattle, and that was the Carolina at Seattle. That was the first NFL game I ever called, for Fox, and it was really, really cool, man. I mean, just to be with you, Seattle's so loud. It was a great experience, and you were an awesome guy to go through that experience with.
Well, no, and I enjoyed, you were just as when you played and you're broadcasting now, very prepared and in the moment. And it's probably more interesting coming from your side as a player, going right up to the booth. You don't get a lot of reps, you don't get a lot of practice. There's no real preseason in a lot of cases, but obviously you're doing well, and it's good to be on with you talking NFL, which we're still doing all these years later.
Chris, I didn't realize until I was doing some prep on you. I didn't know, you got your start in high school. You've always known this is what you wanted to do, and you started early.
It was one of those in Miami, South Florida, growing up as a kid, supposed to be doing the homework. I would call in on a talk show, and this was before they had caller ID, Ross, so I could be Chris from Miami, but I wanted to talk more sports, so I'd hang up, disguise my voice, and I was Duke from North Miami, and I'd get on the air and agree with my earlier call. And I had this going for a couple of years, and then they invited me down to it was WKAT in Miami Beach, invited me down to their studio. They had fan caller night, and I had to tell them I was the same guy. And they said, well, you want to work part-time here on weekends, so behind the scenes. And that's kind of how I broke through, and then, more radio and then television and on from there, ESPN and Fox. But it was a funny beginning. But as a teenager, one of the early, going out with a tape recorder doing interviews, my first 2 interviews, it was Muhammad Ali at the Fontainebleau Hotel. He was preparing for a fight. And then Don Shula, who at the time, of course, Dolphins coach. We knew he was big, but we didn't know he was going to be the kind of coach he wound up being. It was a kind of a fascinating start. And it's been a fun ride ever since. I mean, I still enjoy just even the Super Bowl this last year, hustling on the field to catch up with Mahomes and Andy Reid after a great moment. So that never gets old.
Man, that is awesome. So, and so first of all, people always ask me, hey, I want to get a career in the media, or I want to be a broadcaster. And I'm always like, well, to be honest with you, it's really, really hard. I'm lucky that I played long enough that I even got a shot in the first place. And I always try to tell them, the guys like you, they've been doing it since high school. And then a lot of times they go to Syracuse or whatever. And
right.
if you didn't play for a while, it is really difficult.
Yeah, but you applied the same thing as a lot of ex-players. Once you transition to the career, you put in the hard work. You know the game, obviously. You played the game, but then you work at the broadcast aspects. So I give you guys a lot of credit, the ex-athletes, and you can tell the ones that really put in the time. As far as, and I've spoken for different schools, different levels of college, even high school about the business, Ross. And what's good, the good news is it's difficult to get in, but it's changed and it's evolved, and we're in a difficult time now. But between social media and websites and team websites and channels, 24-hour channels for different sports leagues and regional channels and radio, of course, and podcasts, there's a lot of different avenues for somebody who really wants to do this. And then you work from there. You put in the hard work, you get along with people, you do the best you can. But and I think it's a competitive business because it's a fun business. And you hope that people keep still trying to get in because it makes us all better.
So a couple things that I didn't realize either, Chris, until I was, looking you up. I remember now you during the earthquake at the World Series in '89. I didn't remember it until I read it. I'm like, oh yeah, that was Chris.
It was my first year at ESPN, and a lot happened that year. I was the West Coast reporter and covering the Giants A's at what was the old Candlestick Park with Chris Berman and Bob Lee in the auxiliary press box because they didn't have a fancy new one. So we're out essentially in the stands. And the minute this hit, I'd been through a few minor ones, but Bob and Chris had not. And it sounded like a plane had kind of hit the stadium. It was right before, but you knew something was different. And thank goodness the stadium was built in bedrock because there wasn't as much serious injury. We had no idea serious injury was going on around town, the kind of power in this earthquake. But the field, this stood out to me. I remember watching the field, and you could see different players, Mark McGuire and Terry Steinbach of the A's, the Giants just scattering, and their families were near because it was in the pregame. But it looked like the field, and it was a visual, obviously, because things are shaking, but it really looked like the field had a wave to it, like it was rolling. I mean, it really looked that way, and it was jarring. And then after that, we all just reacted. And Al Michaels and ABC calling the game did a great job, but they used the satellite trucks of ESPN at the time to stay on the air because power was knocked out through much of the community. But yeah, it was one of those moments, Ross, you're there to cover sports. And then, of course, the days after, I had to stay there and talk to the commissioner, Fay Vincent, and where they're going to continue the World Series and how they go about it, all of these decisions that seem easy now, but at the moment were difficult. But you go into a sporting event to cover it that way, and then, of course, something bigger, more important happens, and everybody has to react. I've had a few of those when I've covered events through the course of time, but that was one of the first major earlier ones that sticks with me every time I watch a World Series or the anniversary of that date comes up.
And then the other thing is, and again, this is another one that I kind of remembered but forgot. So many of, I guess they're called catchphrases that I didn't remember that they were you, Chris, from your SportsCenter days. That deserves a wow. I kid because I care. 3-ball, a hoop and some harm. So I was born in '79, right? So when you're at ESPN from '88 to '98, that's from when I am 9 years old to 19 years old, right? So those were my SportsCenter ESPN heyday. So I knew you very well, but then it's just like I forgot that you were the one that came up with those terms. Like that was like my childhood, man. I love that.
Yeah, it's funny. You're making me see. Well, what you're saying is I'm really old, and I'll meet guys in the business that say, "Yeah, I watched you growing up, or I watched you in college." And it's funny, the catchphrases when we were doing it, that was the era when really SportsCenter was it because there was no other place really to get 24-hour sports and watch the show. I worked with people in the early years like Linda Cohn and Mike Tirico, who's moved on, and certainly Dan Patrick, Charlie Steiner at different times. And we'd sit around, we're all sports guys waiting to go on, and we watch games, and you talk like you're sitting there with your friends watching, and so you get you throw in phrases. There's a hoop and some harm instead of a basket and a foul, or a great shot. I was like, wow, I started saying wow, and they were like, come on with the wow, and I'm like, all right, well that deserves a wow. So you apply those when you're doing a highlight or through the course of the show, and with the audience watching, then the size of the audience and the focus, they would catch on, and people would care. So we all use phrases and terms in different ways, and we try to avoid, at least I do, Ross, cliches when doing sports or calling a game, but some of them fit and you have to go with them. But if you can branch off of those and relate to the people watching the game and how they would react, or the highlights in this case, I think that's how those kind of got going. And those were some early fun, SportsCenter years. And it's still good to see a lot of those people that I worked with doing well in different ways. And a lot of people had different catchphrases. I know Dan Patrick had a few, even Craig Kilborn, if you want to go back through some of those years. But it was a lot of fun. It was just sports fans kind of hanging out and then doing a broadcast.
Awesome. So you've done so many different things, including calling NFL games for a long time now. You do the sideline stuff as well as anyone. That's why they have you for the Super Bowl. And I know you get asked this all the time. And first of all, it's a credit to you that you're able to do SportsCenter and sideline and call games and everything else. Is there one that you like the most? Like, would you rather be on the sideline? Would you rather be in the booth? Do you like the studio stuff? Do you like doing an interview like your new podcast? What's your favorite?
Well, I think, Ross, I was never good enough to play sports outside of high school. I mean, I played them as a kid, so I always admire and appreciate those that have played professionally. So I liked talking to people about sports. And so I think certainly the NFL is the thing. People use that phrase, it's the Super Bowl of dog shows, the Super Bowl of racing. So the Super Bowl in the NFL, I mean, that's kind of what I grew up on. It's my first love and passion. So that'll always be calling an NFL game or doing anything to do with the NFL or pro football, certainly up there. But I did do the up close half-hour interview show, and we expanded that a little bit live from LA after Roy Firestone left at ESPN in the 90s during that stretch with ESPN and SportsCenter. And that's one of the reasons I like the CMI, the Chris Myers interview on podcast. One is I still like what you're doing here. I still like interviewing and talking to people. That's why I enjoy doing the postseason for Fox with the NFL playoffs, even though those are quick and on the sideline, different kinds of interviews than this format. But interviewing people in sports is usually very fun. I mean, there's sometimes serious issues we talked about, but I love the stories of overcoming adversity, reacting in tough spots, hitting high points and low points, and things that, you didn't know about what makes people tick. And so that's really something I'll always want to do, along with whatever else. And I still cover baseball and things like that for Fox, whatever else I'm required to do. But certainly, the NFL, America runs on football. It hasn't always been that way, but in this generation, it's certainly it's close to me, and it would stand out to be number one. And then interviewing people in sports or interviewing interesting people in general, I think is a real passion of mine. But I've always enjoyed all the things along the way, from reporting to hosting highlight shows to radio, podcast. I mean, it's really all part of what makes sports fun.
How do you think calling games will be different this year? I know you're going to be calling games for Fox again. How do you think it'll be different? I mean, I know they're experimenting with artificial crowd noise. I guess I'm just curious about your thoughts on that, and just calling games with, in a lot of cases, nobody in the crowd.
Yeah, I think very few teams, at least starting out, are going to have even a low percentage, 15 to 20% at their stadium. And yeah, I think we're still defining, meaning we at Fox, the bosses, how they want to do things and in the guidelines of the NFL. But it's safety first. And I really want to applaud, all the sports that are making the attempt, but the NFL, especially here, for what they've done in the offseason and then going forward with the safety guidelines. But keeping the sport going and whatever way they can, and having backup plans for their teams. From our standpoint of covering the game, usually, I remember when you did the game with me, you'd get to go to practice on Friday for the home team, and you'd watch, and then you'd meet personally with some players without cameras to gather information, and some coaches. So in the early going, I think that's going to change. If you are at practice, you have to maybe stay distance. And then I think most meetings, at least the early plan, is to have them on Zoom, even if you're in one room and they're on the other, for obviously you don't want anybody to get infected, where they're being extra careful about that. And then the same for the visiting team on Saturday, whether it's when they get to that particular city or not. And the other interesting thing is, as a sideline reporter, is that no on-field reporting, even pregame for sideline reporters. They're going to have to stay in an area kind of in and around the stadium. They could be behind the bench but they don't. They're just limiting the number of people on the field. And a lot of times, even as us in the booth, play-by-play and analysts, we'd get down on the field pregame and talk to some coaches, without cameras or a few players, last-minute information, and that's going to change, at least in the early going. But I think that the biggest adjustment, Ross, will be, and we've seen this, we're learning from baseball, and I think the NFL is trying to adjust and adapt. The noise at the stadium, places like Seattle and New Orleans will not have their fans. Minnesota, another place that's so loud. So I think there's going to be two waves of sound. There's going to be some ambient stadium sound, and then there'll be from an NFL official controlling kind of the sound that will be equal for the rest of the television broadcast. Now, how they handle that in terms of a home team scoring or an interception or turnover, that'll be a challenge, because as a broadcaster, you're going to have to react to that in the moment along with the analysts. And usually we ride that crowd. If they're really loud, you got to lay out and let it happen. So there's a lot of moving parts, but our business is always changing, and we're all going to have to adapt and just do the best we can.
And Chris, what about all of the social justice initiatives? I mean, I'm sure that you probably still haven't talked, gotten a game plan from your bosses for Fox there either, but that's going to be a big part of the coverage, at least early in the season.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be something that we will probably try, along with the league, to be in concert and understanding what the players are trying to represent. I know one mission that we all have is that players that have done things positively in their community or for social justice, we want to bring those stories out the best way that we can as a network, whether it be in pregame shows or when there is time through the course of the game without interrupting the flow of the game. But there's still a lot to be decided upon that.
Last questions about the new podcast, man. I remember you kind of what you said earlier, the interview show you had at ESPN. That's the other thing I thought of with you. So that's great. Tell me about the podcast and who you're going to have on.
Yeah, well, we debuted with Urban Meyer because the college football to play or not to play issue was a hot topic. Of course, the Big Ten and Pac-12 not playing, which is hard to understand when at least the SEC and some other conferences are giving it a go. Now, I know college, as you know, different than a professional league, but I think there are ways as we as a country try to move forward within health guidelines to try and do things. So he talked a little bit about that. And Urban, it was interesting too, the timing, Ross, because Urban, had Alex Smith. He coached him back at Utah many years ago. And so the health and the comeback story of Alex Smith in Washington. And then, of course, he coached Haskins at Ohio State, or was around Haskins. And so those two now are competing in Washington for the quarterback position, and a guy who coached Tim Tebow. So anyway, he talked about a number of things, both in the college game, the NFL, recruiting, et cetera. But what I like is this format where you have time to tell stories, to expound upon things. Warren Moon, Hall of Fame quarterback. In fact, I didn't realize, digging back, the first undrafted and black quarterback to be enshrined in the Hall of Fame back in 2006. But a lot to say about what's going on today and the quarterbacks of today. And then, Jimmy Johnson on the just enshrined in the Hall of Fame, although because of circumstances didn't get to give his speech. But the Fox broadcaster, he'll talk a lot about this year's Dallas Cowboys team and how coaches have to adjust to what's going on. So those are some of the conversations. I'll have Frank Caliendo on. I'm a big Impressionist fan. Have him do all the sports people that he does, which is very funny. So those are some of the things, and then I'll interject. And I know you're going to be on with me later in the year, and I appreciate you adjusting your schedule, because I wanted to have you on. It usually drops or airs first time Wednesday, and I want to stay, topical when we can. Obviously, once the football season gets going, then we'll have a lot to discuss about who's doing what and how teams are reacting. But the uncertainty of the year should be fun. So those are some of the things in the podcast that will go in a number of different directions. But I like it because it's like the up close half-hour free-flowing format to really get to know people and get their thoughts on things and be as timely as you can when you can.
Can't wait to check it out, Chris. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
All right, my pleasure. We'll talk to you soon. Enjoy the season.
Absolutely. You too, man. I'm sure, hopefully I'll see you down the road.
All right.
There he is, Chris Myers, at Chris Myers Fox on Instagram. Really interesting to see how these networks are going to cover these NFL games without fans, with maybe artificial crowd noise, with the different social justice initiatives. Going to be fascinating to see it all unfold on our televisions. You know what's not fascinating and it's not cool? not feeling secure in your own home. Don't let it happen. You know, what I have found is a lot of people don't even realize what they're missing until they get Simply Safe. It's got everything you need to protect your home with none of the drawbacks of traditional home security. So it's got the arsenal of sensors and cameras to blanket every room, window, and door tailored specifically for your home. It's got the professional monitoring, but there's no contract, no pushy sales guys, no hidden fees, no fine print, and it all starts at $15 a month. Try Simply Safe today at simplysafe.com/Tucker. You get free shipping and a 60-day risk-free trial. There is nothing to lose. That's simplysafe.com/Tucker.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, lots to discuss today. Let's start with a big trade that sends edge rusher Yannick Ngakoue from the Jags to the Vikings for a second-round pick and a conditional fifth-round pick.
You know, it doesn't seem like it's that big a deal. Like, you know, I mean, second-round pick and a fifth-round pick seems reasonable for Ngakoue. However, he's only going to be there for 1 year unless they get him signed to a long-term deal, which they can't now. So it's really just a 1-year thing for the Vikings. But what's unbelievable to me about it, Brian, I've never seen anything like this, I don't think, is that he is taking, by the last report I saw, $4.5 million less. He was supposed to get $17.78 million. He's taking about $5 million less to go ahead and play for the Vikings. He agreed to play for like less than $13 million. I think it's crazy. I would never do that, ever, if I'm being honest. But, hey, it's his life.
Tuck's Takes.
Speaking of pay cuts, Ross, Eagles' Jason Peters reportedly will not move back out to left tackle from his right guard position unless the team gives him a raise.
This is a very unique situation. I'm not sure. I mean, these are back-to-back things that I can't remember seeing. One is a franchise tag guy saying, I'll take $5 million less to go play for this other team in this other city. Wow. That's number one. And then number two, you've got a guy like Jason Peters saying, I'm not switching positions unless I get more money. Now, look, I think you guys know me over the years. I'm all for every player getting as much money as they can. Go for it. It's a tough business. It's a really hard career. Maximize the financial security you can get for your families. I don't really understand the Yannick Ngakoue one. And for Jason Peters, I don't really understand this either. I just, you know, it's almost like, to me, he's been a left tackle the whole time. So if you're going to put me in the right guard, I want to get paid more. But if I can stay at left tackle, which is my natural position, then I'd rather, you know, then I'll get paid less. The other thing that doesn't quite sit right with me is it's an injury. Like, it's one thing if they voluntarily moved him out there or said, Dillard's not playing well, we're moving you out there. But there's an injury. So really interesting situation. Looking forward to seeing how it unfolds.
Tuck's Takes.
Some Dolphins news to dive into as the team traded linebacker Raekwon McMillan to the Raiders for flipped 4th and 5th round picks. And sad news from quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick. His mother passed away, so he's going to miss some time.
Right. So McMillan getting flipped for 4th and 5th round picks, not a tremendous amount of value. I mean, it's just kind of like, it's almost like a conditional 7th round pick, except maybe they feel like there's a little more value there. I don't know. And as for Ryan Fitzpatrick, he is a friend of mine. And even if he wasn't a friend of mine, I cannot imagine what it would be like to lose my mom. I will have a very, 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 very difficult time with that whenever that happens. My mom is the greatest person in the history of the world. And I think a lot of people feel that way about their moms. And so I can understand why Fitzpatrick reportedly left the field distraught and needed some time away.
Tuck's Takes.
Finally, Bears head coach Matt Nagy said he's not going to announce a starting quarterback before the opener, and LSU wide receiver Jamar Chase, or should we now call him former LSU wide receiver Jamar Chase, says he's going to opt out this season to prepare for the NFL draft next season.
Well, two things here. First of all, Nagy is doing the Jedi mind trick, and you might as well. I mean, on some level, that makes it pretty clear, right, that neither guy has stood out or been that outstanding, because if they had, it would be pretty obvious, and so people would know that. So that's the one part I would mention. But you know what? Why not? You get some value out of not having to have the Detroit Lions know which guy's starting. They're different players. I'm okay with it. For Jamar Chase, look, he's projected top 5, top 10 pick. He's the number 1 receiver. You really can't go anywhere but down. I mean, you really can't. So the risk-reward ratio, it's just not there to play for guys like this. And that's even without coronavirus. That's my big takeaway, Bri, will be what's it going to be like after coronavirus. I think you'll have other guys just sitting out even when we're past sort of the coronavirus era, if you will. One other note, just the Derwin James injury and the Jalen Reagor injury. Looks like Jalen Reagor, the Eagles receiver, is out for at least 4 weeks with a shoulder injury. Man, the Eagles, every year, their injury luck is just absolutely brutal. And then Derwin James, he's got this meniscus issue. He unfortunately looks like he might be one of those guys that just cannot stay healthy. And, I mean, he's a guy that some people look at as being a defensive player of the year candidate. And, I mean, it's a shame. It affects how you feel about the Chargers. It affects how you feel about betting on the defensive player of the year candidates. Whatever you're going to bet, though, you do it at DraftKings. And guess what? Football is right around the corner. DraftKings is giving all users a no-brainer to start the season. Listen up, because you do not want to miss this. Have you ever heard of a football team losing by 100 points? Well, for week 1, DraftKings is ensuring that even if Kansas City were to lose in historic fashion, you would still cash your bet. DraftKings Sportsbook has moved the spread to Kansas City plus 101 points for all users. Are you kidding me? No brainer. On top of that amazing offer, DraftKings is giving away up to $100 million in prizes to all users who enter their free football survivor pool. So everyone can do that. All you have to do is sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook, enter their survivor pool, and you'll instantly get a share up to $100 million in giveaways. Download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code ROSS to take advantage of this no-brainer of an offer. That's promo code ROSS to get in on all the action for a limited time only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or PA only. Bonus comprised of a first deposit bonus and a first bet match, each up to $500. Deposit bonus requires 25 times playthrough. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER, or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. Speaking of with it, Brian, let's get with it from an email perspective.
Ever wanted to ask an NFL player a question? Well, here's your chance. It's time to Ask Ross.
Email address, ross@rosstucker.com. If you ever take advantage of any sponsors, such as DraftKings, especially with the Sportsbook app and the code ROSS for the chance to get a free Madden, you can ask me any question you want. What do you got, Brian?
Hey, good afternoon, Ross. I've used the Amazon banner ad to make a purchase with my confirmation receipt attached to this email. Here's my question. Who would be some of the founding members of the Ross Tucker Journeyman Hall of Fame? LeGarrette Blount, Ryan Fitzpatrick, etc. Guys who have had some success with various teams, but just can't stick around with any one team for an extended amount of time. think I'd asked this question a while back. I don't remember if it ever got on the air, so I'm asking it again. This is from Josh Taylor.
Ooh, that's a good question. And off the top of my head, Josh McCown is one that comes up to mind. Certainly Ryan Fitzpatrick is a great one. I don't know. Do you count T.O. with all the teams he's played for over the years? He's kind of a journeyman when you think about it, although he had longer stints some other places. I'm trying to think who else would fit in that category. It's a good question, Josh. You'd have to give me some more names because off the top of my head, I can't think of that many journeymen who, had a lot of positive moments. It's a good question. Really good question. I like that one. I also like Pizza Boy Brewing, and I like DynastyFreaks.com. Shout outs to both of them. I also like the College Draft Podcast. We are talking SEC with Emery Hunt on today's College Draft Podcast. And tomorrow, got a little special Tuesday edition of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. You're going to want to listen to that. I'm just telling you, it is prediction time. I think we're done here.
Thanks for listening to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Fantasy Feast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, RossTucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.